Okay, welcome to this video then on comparing the power and conflict poetry. Don't forget to hit subscribe and the bell. There'll be a video for every single poem in the power and conflict collection that will give you a grade 5 answer, as well as my top 3 quotes as well. So we know this is a tricky question because there's 15 poems and only one of those poems is going to come up in the exam. What poem you have to compare it to will not be printed at all, so you have to have a good knowledge of all of those poems and make a really good decision on the day as to which poem you're going to compare to. It's also worth trying to learn some of the quotes from those poems as well, although the marks for using quotes can come from the named poem. As long as you make a good choice of which poem to compare to and make some really good points about what is similar and what is different, you will be absolutely fine. An example question then is this: explore how the poets of Bayonet charge and one other poem from the Power and Conflict collection present the effect of war on soldiers. So, with that question in mind, there are 3 steps. These steps don't change, they're the same for whatever poem we're given. Step 1 is to annotate any lines in the poem that we've been given that's printed in the exam that demonstrate the effect of war in this case. Step 2 is to start writing about that poem using what, how and why. It's not worth confusing yourself on which poem to compare to at this point. Once you've done that first paragraph, step 3 is to then think about which poem we could compare it to and to focus on that what, how, why structure again. So my top 3 quotes. Number 1 is this: suddenly he awoke and was running raw, stumbling across a field of clods towards a green hedge. In this quote then we've got the poem opening in media res, which means we're thrown straight into the action. It's the word suddenly, the adverb suddenly, that does this. There was no warning. It highlights the reality of his situation. We've also got the negative verb choice in stumbling, which allows us to see the hardship that he's going through. It reinforces that lack of warning. It also alludes to uncertainty or possibly to fatigue as well, which highlights the reality of war. We've also got the juxtaposition of the green hedge, which is important. Green has got connotations of life. It highlights to us the extremity of war here. He runs for his life towards that green hedge of safety. My second quote is this one: the patriotic tear that had brimmed in his eye. We've got the personification of the patriotic tear here, which is important. We've got the connotations of tear, which illustrate just how patriotic it was. He was so patriotic that he got emotional about that. The past tense of had is really important. It illustrates that at some point during war, whilst being at the front line, he lost patriotism, and perhaps there's a reversal of opinion. My third quote, this one: he plunged past with his bayonet towards the green hedge, king, honour, human dignity, etc. We've got the continuation of that negative verb choice. We've got the plunged in this one, which illustrates the hardship and the extremity again of his situation. The green hedge is revisited and repeated to highlight the soldier's last bit of hope as he charges. And we've got the listing, which gives us a glimpse into his final thoughts as he tries to remember why he's there. What is he doing this for? Is it for his king? Is it for honour? Is it for dignity? We've got an emotive climax. How might that look then as a what, how, why paragraph? Here's an example that would get us a grade 5 in the exam. What? Ted Hughes presents a soldier who begins to question his role in the conflict. The how is where we bring in the evidence. This is clearly evident when he describes the patriotic tear that had brimmed in his eye. Notice that quote's embedded. Hughes merges personification and the past tense to illustrate his loss of hope. The why bit is the important bit. This is the bit that gets us the grade 5. Hughes' use of personification illustrates the greatness of his patriotism. He's so patriotic that it makes him emotional about his honour and his role in fighting for his country. We see this through the use of the word tear, which has emotive connotations. The use of the past tense had, however, illustrates to the reader how this once patriotic and loyal soldier now regrets his involvement. Ted Hughes, this is the link at the end to context. Ted Hughes himself wrote that once a soldier leaves the trench, they become a weapon of war and cease being human. Perhaps it's this that forces the soldier into this regretful state, because it's likely that he will not return. Bayonet soldiers were at the forefront of the fighting, face to face with the enemy. That bit of context is really important. Next bit to do then, step 3, is to work out which poem we're going to compare this to. You could choose Exposure, you could choose Remains, War Photographer, Charge of the Light Brigade. It's worth making a quick plan. Here's an example then of a paragraph that compares Bayonet Charge, in this case, to Remains. Again, what, how, why link. Simon Armitage also presents the effect of war on soldiers, whereas in Bayonet Charge, war affects the soldier in the present. In Remains, Armitage focuses on the after effect. Simon Armitage presents the horrifying effect of war through the mind of a soldier who's returned from a war zone but now must live with what he's seen and done. This is clearly evident at the end of the poem when the soldier says, but near to the knuckle here and now, his bloody life in my bloody hands. Armitage merges repetition and double entendre to illustrate the effect that being at war has had on him. The double entendre highlights not only the violence and horror of the situation that he remembers, but similarly to Bayonet Charge, also allows us to see his anger and frustration, whereas in Bayonet Charge the soldier is affected mid-battle and remains he's angry and frustrated at not being able to forget. The phrase near to the knuckle is also poignant because it suggests verging on something. The memory is clearly vivid and consumes his present day and every waking moment. Little link to context at the end, the soldier clearly suffers from PTSD, having returned from war. PTSD is a disorder that affects those who've experienced a traumatic event. Notice in blue the comparative points that show the examiner that we are comparing it to the original poem. What I would do now is have a practice, perhaps use one of the other two quotes to form your own what, how, why link paragraph, and then a second paragraph that compares it to the additional poem as well. Plenty more tips on my Instagram, Mr Crawford ENG. You can also email me sample answers as well. I'll happily give those a look for you and give you some feedback. info@mrcrawford.co.uk. Laters.